My name is Cornelia, and at 58, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal in my 35 years as a high school principal. Students lying about homework, parents covering up their children's mistakes, colleagues backstabbing for promotions. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed that evening at my retirement party, when the person I trusted most with my son's happiness tried to destroy my life with a simple glass of punch. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you believe families should protect each other, and don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, you won't believe how this nightmare unfolded. Standing in my son Michael's beautifully decorated backyard that warm September evening, I felt nothing but pure gratitude. 35 years of shaping young minds, dealing with difficult parents, and navigating school politics had finally come to an end. The retirement party Michael and his wife Marlene had thrown for me was absolutely perfect. Twinkling lights hung from the oak tree's tables covered in crisp white linens held my favorite foods. And 45 of my closest friends, family members, and former colleagues had gathered to celebrate this milestone. I had dedicated my entire adult life to education, starting as a young teacher, fresh out of college, and working my way up to principal of Jefferson High School. The decision to retire hadn't been easy, but at 58, I was ready to enjoy the fruits of my labor. My pension was solid, my house was paid off, and I had enough savings to travel and pursue hobbies I'd neglected for decades. Michael, my 32-year-old son and only child, had inherited his father's kind heart and my stubborn determination. He worked as an engineer and had been married to Marlene for 3 years. She was 29, blonde petite, and had always seemed sweet enough, though we'd never been particularly close. Tonight, however, she was being unusually attentive, constantly checking on me, refilling my plate, and insisting on bringing me fresh drinks every few minutes. My sister Agnes had driven down from Portland for the occasion, and my longtime friend Joyce, who'd taught alongside me for 20 years, was regaling everyone with stories from our early days in the classroom. Former colleagues shared memories of school board meetings, graduation ceremonies, and the countless students whose lives we'd touched together. The evening felt magical. Marlene had outdone herself with the decorations incorporating my favorite colors of deep purple and gold throughout the setup. She'd even created a beautiful photo display chronicling my career, complete with newspaper clippings from when our school had won state recognition for academic excellence. But something felt slightly off about Marlene's behavior. Her smiles seemed forced, and there was a nervous energy about her that I couldn't quite place. Every few minutes, she'd appear at my elbow with a fresh glass of her signature punch, insisting I needed to stay hydrated. When I protested that I was fine, she'd laugh and say she just wanted everything to be perfect for my special night. I pushed the uneasy feeling aside, attributing it to my own anxiety about this major life transition. After all, retirement represented the unknown, and change had never come easily to me. As the evening progressed, Marlene's strange behavior became more pronounced, and I found myself paying closer attention to her interactions with other guests. She seemed distracted, frequently glancing at her watch and hovering near the beverage table with an intensity that struck me as odd for a hostess. Over the past few months, I'd noticed Marlene taking an unusual interest in my personal affairs. She'd started asking questions about my retirement plans, my financial situation, and whether I'd updated my will recently. At the time, I'd assumed she was simply being caring, perhaps worried about my well-being as I aged. She'd even offered to help me organize my important documents and suggested I might want to consider giving someone power of attorney just in case. The questions had seemed innocent enough, but tonight they took on a different quality in my memory. During one conversation in July, Marlene had mentioned that people my age sometimes developed memory problems and that it might be wise to have legal protections in place. She'd even recommended a lawyer friend of hers who specialized in elder care planning. My sister Agnes had mentioned something strange to me earlier in the evening that now seemed more significant. She'd pulled me aside during dinner to say that Marlene had been asking her odd questions about our family's financial history, and whether I'd mentioned any concerns about my mental sharpness. Agnes had found it peculiar, but hadn't wanted to worry me on my special night. I remembered other incidents now with growing unease. Marlene had suggested several times that I might be getting forgetful, pointing out when I'd repeat a story or forget a name. She'd done it in such a caring way that I'd actually started to worry about myself. Last month, she'd even mentioned that she'd noticed me seeming confused during our last family dinner, though I had no memory of being anything other than perfectly clear-headed. There was also the matter of Marlene's sudden financial difficulties. Michael had mentioned that they were struggling with some unexpected expenses, though he'd been vague about the details. I'd offered to help, but Marlene had quickly declined, saying they'd figure it out themselves. Now, watching her nervous energy and controlling behavior around the drinks, a chill ran down my spine. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't yet put my finger on exactly what. The turning point came when I excused myself to use the bathroom inside the house. The party was in full swing with laughter and conversation filling the warm night air. I felt grateful for the brief respite from socializing and took a moment to refresh my makeup and collect my thoughts. As I prepared to rejoin the celebration, I slid open the patio door and stepped back outside. What I saw made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law. Marlene was standing at the beverage table with her back to me, hunched over something in her hands. From my position by the sliding door, partially hidden by the outdoor curtains, I had a clear view of her actions. She glanced around nervously, checking to make sure no one was watching, then quickly dropped something small into one of the crystal punch glasses. My heart began pounding so hard, I thought it might burst from my chest. My hands started shaking as I watched her stir the contents of the glass with a small spoon, then dispose of what looked like an empty vial in her purse. The expression on her face was one of satisfaction mixed with determination, nothing like the sweet, caring mask she'd been wearing all evening. I pressed myself against the doorframe, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Part of me wanted to believe I'd misunderstood, that perhaps she'd been adding some kind of garnish or medication for herself. But the secretive nature of her actions and the way she'd hidden the vial told a different story. Marlene picked up the doctored glass and turned toward the party with a bright, artificial smile. She was heading directly toward me, clearly intending to offer me the drink she'd just tampered with. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter-in-law was trying to drug me. The implications were terrifying. What was in that glass? What did she hope to accomplish? The questions raced through my mind as I fought to maintain my composure. I couldn't let her know I'd seen what she'd done, not until I figured out how to handle this dangerous situation. My mind raced as Marlene approached with the doctored drink, her smile as bright and fake as plastic flowers. Years of dealing with crisis situations as a school principal had taught me to think quickly under pressure, and those skills kicked in now when I needed them most. "Cornelia, I brought you some fresh punch," Marlene chirped, extending the glass toward me. "I noticed your other glass was empty, and I wanted to make sure you stayed hydrated on your special night." I accepted the glass with steady hands, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Thank you, dear. You've been so thoughtful tonight." The key was to appear normal, while buying myself time to figure out how to safely dispose of whatever poison she'd put in my drink. I pretended to take a small sip, barely letting the liquid touch my lips, then lowered the glass and smiled appreciatively. "This is delicious. You know, I was just thinking how warm it's gotten out here. Would you mind helping me move some of those heavy gift boxes inside? My back isn't what it used to be." Marlene's eyes darted to the glass in my hand, clearly expecting me to drink more. "Oh, of course. Let me just grab my own drink first." This was my chance. As Marlene turned back toward the beverage table to retrieve her own glass, I quickly scanned the area to make sure no one else was watching. The other guests were engaged in conversation, and Michael was across the yard, showing his uncle something on his phone. In one swift motion, I switched the contents of my glass with Marlene's, which sat innocently on the table where she'd left it. The liquid looked identical, and I prayed she wouldn't notice any difference. I set my now safe glass back in its original position and picked up hers, knowing it contained whatever drug she'd intended for me. My hands trembled slightly as I completed the switch, but I managed to maintain my composure as Marlene returned. She picked up what she thought was my untouched drink and took a healthy sip while chatting about the evening's success. "The party really has been lovely," I said, watching her carefully. "Michael must be so proud to have such a caring wife." Marlene beamed at the compliment, completely unaware that she'd just consumed her own poison. "I just want what's best for this family," she replied, taking another drink, and what followed was both fascinating and terrifying to watch. Within minutes of consuming the doctored punch, Marlene began showing signs of distress. At first it was subtle, a slight stumble, a confused look when someone asked her a simple question, a moment of apparent disorientation when she forgot what she was saying mid-sentence. I stayed close, ostensibly helping with hostess duties while carefully observing her deteriorating condition. Other guests began to notice something was wrong when Marlene slurred her words while thanking my former colleague for attending. Her coordination became increasingly impaired, and she knocked over a small decorative candle while trying to straighten a tablecloth. Michael rushed to his wife's side when she nearly fell while walking across the uneven grass. "Marlene, are you feeling all right? You seem a little unsteady." "I'm fine," she insisted, but her words came out thick and unclear. Her pupils were dilated and she was blinking rapidly as if trying to focus her vision. "Just tired, I think." The irony wasn't lost on me. Whatever substance Marlene had intended to use against me was now working on her, and the symptoms were becoming impossible to ignore. Other family members gathered around expressing concern and offering to help her sit down. Agnes pulled me aside with worry creasing her features. "Something's not right with Marlene. Should we call someone?" I knew this was the moment of truth. I could let the situation play out naturally, or I could reveal what I'd witnessed and potentially save Marlene from the full effects of whatever she'd taken. Despite her betrayal, I couldn't stand by and watch her potentially suffer serious harm. "Michael," I called out, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed over decades of handling crises. "I need to tell you something important, something I saw tonight that explains what's happening to Marlene." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered family and friends. I explained exactly what I'd witnessed, Marlene secretly adding something to my drink the way she'd hidden the vial, and my decision to switch our glasses. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and growing anger as the implications sank in. "That's impossible," he said weakly. But even as he spoke, he was looking at his wife with new eyes, seeing the signs that supported my account. Marlene, despite her impaired state, realized what had happened. Her face went white as she understood that I'd seen everything and that she was now experiencing the effects of her own plot. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, that's not what happened. She's confused. She's been having memory problems." But the evidence was overwhelming. Agnes immediately retrieved Marlene's purse and found the empty glass vial along with a crumpled receipt from a pharmacy dated that afternoon. Joyce, who had taught health classes for years, recognized some of the symptoms Marlene was displaying as consistent with certain sedative medications. Michael called emergency services while I held him together as his world crumbled. "Why would she do this to you?" he kept asking, his voice breaking. What was she trying to accomplish? The paramedics arrived quickly, followed by police officers who took statements from everyone who had witnessed Marlene's condition and behavior. Under pressure and facing the clear evidence, Marlene finally confessed to her scheme. Through slurred speech and with obvious reluctance, she admitted that she'd obtained a prescription sedative and had planned to use it to make me appear confused and mentally impaired. Her goal was to create a pattern of incidents that would support her claims that I was developing dementia and needed someone to take control of my affairs. The police discovered that Marlene had already prepared forged documents attempting to establish power of attorney over my finances. She'd researched the legal requirements and had even scheduled appointments with doctors who might be willing to declare me mentally incompetent based on her testimony about my alleged confusion and memory loss. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Marlene's deception and the desperate circumstances that had driven her to such extreme measures. She had accumulated significant gambling debts that she'd hidden from Michael, and she'd been stealing small amounts from their joint accounts to make minimum payments to creditors. When those sources dried up, she'd become increasingly desperate and had begun viewing my retirement savings and assets as her solution. She'd calculated that if she could gain control over my finances, she could access enough money to pay off her debts and start fresh, all while maintaining the facade of being a caring daughter-in-law. The prescription sedative she'd used came from a doctor she'd manipulated by claiming she needed it for anxiety about caring for an aging family member. She'd planned to document my supposed episodes of confusion and use them to build a case for my incompetence. Michael was devastated not only by his wife's betrayal, but by how completely she'd deceived him. He'd had no idea about the gambling, the debts, or her plans regarding me. The woman he'd married and trusted had been systematically plotting against his own mother while presenting herself as the perfect caring wife. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Marlene was charged with attempted poisoning fraud and elder abuse. The evidence was overwhelming: the forged documents, testimony from multiple witnesses, and her own confession. She faced serious prison time and the complete destruction of her marriage and reputation. Community members who learned about the incident were shocked and outraged. Many reached out to offer support and to share their own concerns about elder abuse, which they now realized was more common and insidious than they'd previously understood. For me, the aftermath was a complex mix of relief, anger, and heartbreak. Relief that I'd trusted my instincts and acted quickly to protect myself. Anger at the violation of trust and the calculated nature of Marlene's betrayal. And heartbreak for my son, who would have to rebuild his life after discovering that his marriage was built on lies and manipulation. The months that followed were a journey of healing, growth, and renewed purpose for both Michael and me. The divorce proceedings were swift given the criminal charges and overwhelming evidence of Marlene's deception. Michael moved into a small apartment while he sorted through the emotional and financial wreckage of his marriage. Initially, my son struggled with guilt and self-blame, wondering how he could have been so blind to his wife's true nature. We spent many evenings talking through his feelings, and I reminded him that Marlene had been skilled at manipulation and deception. Even I, with my experience dealing with difficult people, had been taken in by her act for years. The experience brought Michael and me closer than we'd been since he was a child. We developed new traditions, including weekly dinners, where we could talk openly about everything happening in our lives. He began seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of discovering his wife's betrayal, and slowly he started to heal. For my part, I channeled my anger and experience into something positive. I began volunteering with the county's Elder Protection Services, helping to educate other seniors about the warning signs of financial exploitation and family manipulation. My story became a powerful tool for raising awareness about how trusted family members could become predators. I also became involved with support groups for families affected by gambling addiction, sharing my perspective as someone who had been victimized by a gambler's desperate actions. These connections helped me understand that Marlene's addiction had driven her to behaviors she might never have considered otherwise, though it didn't excuse her choices. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive. Former students reached out to express their shock and concern, and many shared their own stories of family betrayal or elder abuse. I realized that my experience, while painful, had opened important conversations about protecting vulnerable adults. Michael eventually began dating again, but carefully and with new awareness of red flags in relationships. He developed a stronger sense of boundaries and learned to trust his instincts when something didn't feel right. The experience had aged him, but also made him wiser and more compassionate. As for my retirement, it became everything I'd hoped for and more. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, took up painting, and spent time with friends I'd neglected during my busy working years. The freedom was sweet, made even more precious by the knowledge of what I'd almost lost. The most important lesson I learned was that wisdom and vigilance aren't signs of paranoia, but of survival. Trust is precious, but it must be earned and continually validated through actions, not just words. At 58, I discovered that protecting yourself isn't about being suspicious of everyone, but about staying alert to changes in behavior and trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones sitting at your own dinner table wearing familiar faces and speaking words of love while plotting your destruction. But with courage, quick thinking, and the support of genuine family and friends, even the most carefully laid plans can be turned against those who would harm us. I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Please like this video if my story resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of survival and resilience. Share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the warning signs of elder abuse. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your instincts are often your best protection. Stay safe, stay alert, and never apologize for protecting yourself and those you love.